Welcome to the Church Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Don Hicks. The focus of this podcast is to provide coaching, equipping, and strengthening of church leaders who will lead and equip the believers for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ. This will enable healthy leaders and healthy churches to flourish and thrive as they carry out the Great Commission, the Great Commandment, in the power of the Holy Spirit. This is Don Hicks, your host for the Church Leadership and Focus podcast. We're going to be welcoming back George Shaffer today. George is my friend, also the director of the Deacon Ministry and Leadership for Church Health Solutions. As you know, last time was part one, but this is going to be part two. In our first podcast that we did on this subject of leadership, a conversation in leadership, we covered this. Leadership models in Christian living. We talked about know yourself, learn continually, engage others, and create a climate for success. So today we're going to be talking about problem-solving skills in this area. And so I'm really excited. In fact, the break today, we had a great time just talking about how that God is so wonderful, and how that when we feel like we don't have the energy, we don't have the enthusiasm, we don't know what we're going to say or not say, we don't feel prepared, that if we're obedient to God in doing something, God will take care of the rest. That doesn't mean that we don't prepare, because we over-prepare probably. But I just want to encourage you today as a church leader that God has it, and we just need to let go of it sometimes. It's kind of like that movie Frozen, just let it go, let it go. And because we're not letting it go into space, we're letting it go into the hands of God. And we're so excited about providing this podcast to church leadership. So, George, it's good to have you back with us today.
It's good to be back. Looking forward to our second part of this conversation on leadership, and I appreciate you reviewing the people skills that we discussed. And what we're going to discuss in this session are the problem-solving skills. Now, one of the things we'll probably talk about later on is what is the distinction between leadership and management. Let's hold that for later, because there is an important distinguishing factor about it. These terms should not be used interchangeably, in my opinion. And our conversation upcoming about problem-solving skills, I think, will help shed some light on that.
That, in fact, if you're able, take out a piece of paper and a pen and take some notes here. And I just want to put a little plug in here that we're going to release an ebook probably in the first quarter of next year, and it will have assessments. George and I, we love assessments. We assess each other, but what I like about this is self-assessment. And one thing, George, that lacks in leadership in most churches is the deacons or the personnel team says that the pastor has to be evaluated each year, but there's no instrument that they use. You were doing really good till last week. Your sermon was kind of bad, so you're only going to get 0.5% this year. But try to be good all year. But they don't even go back to their job descriptions to see what they're supposed to do and not do. And that, of course, that's another subject, but I thought I would toss that in there. But we're going to talk about these problem-solving skills now. So let's start with think strategically.
Think strategically is very important. It's a very broad category, as all of these are. It just kind of as an aside, keep in mind, we're talking about thousands of behaviors that we can deploy at any particular time. So this is a very dynamic thing. We're trying to analyze what leadership is, But at the end of the day, you really synthesize it in terms of your behaviors and situational leadership, and you know what to do at particular points in time. But right now, we're breaking it down. And so breaking down things strategically is this is a skill set that focuses on organizing and analyzing information and planning and decision making. Some of the key behaviors are organizing and interrelating information, analyzing and synthesizing information, weighing the pros and cons of alternative plans. Then we have to match our resources to the tasks. We have to make certain that we establish priorities for the work that gets done. We have to make timely and well-reasoned decisions. We develop action plans. And at the same time, we need to be flexible because there's new information coming in at all times, and we have to make certain that we're looking at that information, and if there's an opportunity in there, we seize that opportunity. It's interesting, preparation, and I would include in this, and I particularly like 1 Peter 3:15. Always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you. That's a wonderful verse. It requires preparation. It requires making certain that that verse is memorized so that you're prepared to talk to people. So at any rate, this notion of thinking strategically is very broad. If you've been in meetings, and I know you all have, you look for these sorts of things, the priorities, the goals, the plans, the interrelationships of information, and the notion of making decisions. Don, you and I have talked about this a number of times, that decision-making on one hand may seem straightforward, but in fact, it's a little bit more complex than that.
Yes, you have to kind of look at you have plan A, but you might need to look at plan B. But, at the same time, George, you helped me. Sometimes I overthink and I overanalyze. And you wrote on my whiteboard one day a little graph that is burning in my head now. In fact, it's over here on our whiteboard. But will you just say something brief about that?
Yeah, the whole notion of decision making actually has two components. One component is the quality of reasoning. That is the planning, the analysis of the data, getting all the facts that you need, that sort of thing, laying out timelines and the such. And you can get to a point where you've gathered so much information, yet you haven't made a decision. Decisiveness is the second part of decision making. So you have quality of reasoning, gathering your data and that sort of thing. But at some point, you got to make a decision. And what your conversation and my conversation was about was, what is that point? Now, I'm going to use some percentages here. They're going to vary, but the point will be the same. For example, I might be somebody who will operate when I think I've got 80% of my data or 70%. Others may have 90%. There is a point at which, though, you have to pull the trigger and make a decision, because the end result is, if you're waiting for 100% data, you will never have it, and you're going to miss out on opportunities. And I think that's what you and I talked about. What is that point at which you've got enough baseline information? How much more incrementally do you need before you pull the trigger? And so making a decision becomes very important. Decision making on the one level that we just talked about seems pretty straightforward, but in fact, there's tension built in there. Getting the data, do I have enough data? Do I need to make a decision now, or do I wait for more data? And what's the incremental value of waiting? I think that was the nature of our conversation on.
Yeah,
on
and I have a propensity to overanalyze, overthink. What is this going to turn into? How are we going to support all of this? And that's when George put this on my whiteboard several years back and said, Don, look, all of that will take care of itself as it grows. You can't put all the things there and then say, now we're ready to do it. And I think that's where I got paralysis of the analysis. and And I think pastors and church leaders, they say, well, how is this going to affect the senior adults? How is this going to affect young families with children? How is this going to do this? How is this going to do that? But when you think strategically, I think about the story of Joseph.
Oh, yeah,
Over in Genesis 41, 46 through 49.
Right. Absolutely. The National Food Program.
That's right.
Yeah, right. Very important. He had 7 plentiful years, and the ground brought forth abundantly, and he gathered the food, which were laid up in Egypt. And then, of course, later on, there's the famine. 7 years of famine began, and it was famine in all the land, but in the land of Egypt there was bread. So the notion of planning, I think that's a great example of the importance of it, the making of decisions behind it. Joseph was on the case, and obviously that National Food Program was wonderful that he laid out.
You know, George, this takes me back to childhood. My dad, he had a lot of wisdom, but I didn't always appreciate it. He had a lot of advice. I didn't always appreciate it. But he got me into a program where I would put aside $10 a month.
Yeah.
Okay. And he said, now, the more money you make, the more you put in there, but you put it in an investment and you forget about it. You know, that is not money to go. It wasn't a savings account. It was more of an investment program. Now, I was 14 at the time. Now I'm approaching 68 years of age. And I was thinking the other day, you know, I didn't see the value in that. I did it for 10 years and I needed some money for something for a car, so I took it out. But I just did some quick math. And I'm not a mathematician, and I didn't even put that much interest on it, just 2% over, because back then it didn't pay as much as, well, it doesn't pay much now either, but like it did. But, you know, that's all through change. But I would have over $1 million right now, just putting that money aside in compound interest and things. And But when I was a kid, and my dad told me, he said, now, if you cash out of this for a car, you know, that's not a very nice car. If you left it in there, when you get older, you can buy a really nice car and pay cash for it and have money left over for something else. But I think that's the same process here that we don't consider in the church, or we don't consider in our budgeting.
Right. I think you're right. Let's go into problem-solving skill number 6, cast and inspire a shared vision. Now, what this gets to is that whatever you do as a leader in the church, bring the people along and make them part of the vision as soon as you can. The days of when a leader could stand up in front of a group, and I guess this comes more from a secular standpoint and saying this is what we're going to do and this is where we're heading, those days are kind of over. And for sure in a church, one needs to be very incremental, very measured in communicating to the church, this is something that's on my mind. This is a Christ-centered vision. I'm communicating it with you in the hopes that you will be a part of the vision. So it is not just you coming up with the vision, it is you inspiring a vision and including others in it. So, for example, some behaviors with that includes love sharing the gospel to inspire others, casts a Christ-centered vision, engages the church to ensure a shared vision, and communicates in a way that inspires commitment and accountability. Now, there is the story of Nehemiah is just wonderful, and
I love that story.
Yeah, in Nehemiah 2:18, I really think defines this to a T. And he says, "And I told them of the hand of my God which had been good upon me, and also of the king's words that he had spoken to me. So they said, let us rise up and build. Then they set their hands to this good work." That is a wonderful example of a shared vision Nehemiah was the leader of that through prayer with God, because in effect, as we know, God was the one who was the leader in it, and he used Nehemiah, and Nehemiah used teamwork, team building to lay out that whole plan.
But wait a minute, George. Did Nehemiah go to business school?
No. More importantly, Nehemiah had a relationship with his Lord.
I mean, did he go to seminary? Was he a contractor? I mean, engineer?
He was inspired.
Well, what's neat is that his job was a cupbearer to the king. He tasted the wine, so if it was poison, he would die before the king would. But it's interesting in the verses that you read there, the significance of that he took a risk. And the king said, "Why do you look down today? What's wrong? You seem to be depressed." Well, that wasn't a good thing to do. And he said, he's just being honest, "Well, why shouldn't I be? I just got word that the walls are down and my people are exposed to the elements, exposed to enemies and all of this." And he goes, "Well, what do you need?" And so when you read these verses, it caused me to go back and think about that for a moment, because he was a real leader. He trusted God. He said, "Okay, God, I'll do it." And then God enlisted the king to give him all the wood, to give him all the materials, safe passage, and letters to get into the king's forest, to do this and this and this and this, and sanction the whole thing. And I think the people saw that here's a real leader.
Yep.
They didn't just look at him as a cupbearer.
And the king, as I recall, was not a believer.
No, he was not.
Yeah.
So it leads me to believe that God controls the hearts of kings.
Oh, absolutely.
As the
And
scripture says.
as you recount that whole story, you recall that Nehemiah had built the team. He deployed the team around the temple in teams and close to where they lived as they walked around. So he was very bright in terms of...
They were invested because that's their home territory.
Right. So the planning that went into that, I mean, Nehemiah, as you read that story, covers so many skills. He did lots of different things, but the key thing that I want to make certain people get is that it was the hand of the Lord that did that work.
Well, I want to encourage pastors, get into the book of Nehemiah.
Absolutely.
One of the greatest series I ever preached, and this is not because I thought it was great, but the people told me, is I preached verse by verse through the book of Nehemiah. And oh my goodness, it took 6 months, but it was beautiful how God used that and how we became more of a team. And they didn't see Nehemiah as this know-it-all, but he was the leader. He helped provide the stuff, but it doesn't say that Nehemiah built any of the wall. But I like what you said also about the way he did it. Hey, maybe you don't care about A Street over there. You care about P Street where you live. So that's what you're going to do. Everybody had an assigned piece of the wall that gave them strength. But, as you get into that and you see Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, they were not happy with all of that.
That was another point, and we all face that all the time. The Sanballahs of the world still exist.
Yes.
And they were after him and after him and after him, and he persevered through all of that.
And he just simply obeyed God, even with all of the bad press. I remember one time they said, "Hey, if a fox just leaned up against that wall, it would fall. This is no good. These are not masons doing this." Yeah. But, I encourage you as pastors, teach through this with your staff and with your leadership and with the church.
Let's move on to the last of the problem-solving skills, and that is transforming vision into results. Very important to understand that there is a results focus. There's not an activities focus. We're not transforming a vision into activities. We're transforming a vision into results. And we already talked about casting a vision and including that the congregation is part of that vision. Some skills that are associated with achieving results are that one has a results orientation. That's very important because a lot of people have an activity orientation. We need to have a goal and a result orientation, an action mindset, an execution focus on efforts on priorities, implementing plans, establishing metrics is another important point because you want to measure your progress toward achieving goals. Shift course of action when necessary. Now, this points up flexibility. We'd like to think that our plans are always going to work out just the way we've laid them out. Sometimes that doesn't work that way. So we have to turn into some of our flexibility and see what we could do to make changes if necessary. And as we're getting involved in some of this, there is a process that is continuously streamlining the work processes. Why are we doing this step rather than that step? If we've got a 5-step focus, I wonder if it could be a 3-step focus. So it's part of the continuous improvement in our work processes that's important. And that kind of concludes the end of those 7 skills. But Don, this might be a good point where we talk about manager and leader.
Well, I want to get back to one thing.
Sure.
Because what you were actually talking about and giving us an example is a project manager. Now, I was I had a construction company for a time, and I was the project manager. And so we had all this software that the project would go all the way across the wall. We just printed it out and say, okay, here's the starting place. The starting place is not digging the footers or clearing the land. Starting place is the owner getting a budget, going to the bank and borrowing the money based on that. And then how do you get all the subs to work together?
Right.
So it was multi-layered through that. And I would advise pastors, this is why you've got to look at it. If you don't have the skills for this, find out somebody that's a project manager in their business or construction or business and just say, hey, could you just draw this out and help me with this?
And see, that's a good example, not to interrupt you, but that's a good example of how you build relationships, which is something we talked about in the people skills. So
yes.
Building relationships, doing project management work is critical, but you have to have the right people involved in doing that.
Well, I think that this is, guys, you need to really, and gals, you just need to really think about this here, because what it is project management. And it goes back to Noah the ark over in Genesis 8:15 through 19. Then God spoke to Noah saying, go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and cattle and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on earth, and fruitful and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives and him, every animal, every creeping thing, every bird, whatever creeps on the earth. I like how that goes, creeps on the earth.
Yeah.
According to their families went out of the ark. And it throws us back into Nehemiah 6, verse 15. The wall around Jerusalem that had lain in ruins for 140 years was completed. So the wall was finished on the 25th day in 52 days.
That's amazing, isn't it?
52 days.
52 days.
Now, you brought up about goals and results. They didn't look at this as just some project. They based the results. They were able to get together under the right leadership and the right skills, and everybody had a positive attitude about doing this, and they were able to accomplish this in 52 days because the king did ask Nehemiah, how long will you be gone?
All right.
Okay, so I'm glad. He's probably glad they built it that quick as well. But, getting into a leader and a manager, I think this is something that church leaders need to really understand And again, we've been talking about these assessments, but I want to give them a little sneak preview of this one, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Self-assessment questions for transforming vision into results. And so we have a question. Do you stay focused on priorities? Needs development, average, or clear strength? Do you establish metrics for monitoring ministry progress? Needs development, average, or clear strength? And it goes on. That supports what you just said a moment ago. This is a team effort. Pastor, you can't know it all, and you shouldn't know it all. You're a generalist. You're a specialist in preaching and teaching, as the scripture says you should be. But as a leader, you need to be a generalist where you know some of these things, but it's not for you to do it. It's for you to go out and get the people that do it. The more you have with you, the greater success that will go. And so let's talk about leaders and managers. And George, I'm just going to let you have an open mic on this and go with it.
Well, again, this comes from a secular background as well as from a Christian background, and that is the notion of manager and leader. Those are two different words. They are not interchangeable, in my opinion, and this is the rationale behind it. If you take a look at the problem-solving skills, people who are adept at the problem-solving skills tend to be good managers. If they do not have the 4 leadership skills that we talked about, unless they grow those skills, they're not going to be, in all likelihood, an effective leader. A leader, in order to be called a leader, in my opinion, needs to have both leadership, both people skills, as well as problem-solving skills. You need both of those categories. People skills and problem-solving skills. Now, it doesn't mean that you need to be perfect in all of them at all. None of us is perfect in them. But it means that if you go through the assessments that Don has been talking about, we have assessments for each one of those 7 skills. And you can rate yourself and develop your own profile and determine where's the power in your profile. What are those things that you can put in the bank because you're very strong in those areas and you're confident in those areas? And what are the developmental areas that you might have that you seek to enhance? See, you're all leaders to one extent or another, but we're talking about enhancing wherever you are in your leadership walk. So I think one point is to recognize there is a difference between leader and manager. A manager tends to be more of the problem-solving skills where those strengths are, but a leader has to have both, the people skills and the problem-solving skills. That makes sense to you, Don?
Yes, it does. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't have any research to back this up. It's been observation in 45 years of ministry, and the last 17 years or 20 years I've worked with, I specialize in mediation and arbitration in church disputes. But here's what I've observed, that the lead pastor or the senior pastor has to have the skills of being a leader.
Absolutely.
It's unquestionable.
Right. Now, we're not talking perfection, but we're talking areas of strength there.
Right. And I learned that I was a strategic visionary, okay? But without managers, I didn't go anywhere. And so when you realize that you're the leader, it's your responsibility to lead out, to find people that are managers, like a worship pastor. Will they manage all the stuff in music and praise and that type of thing? Then you have a youth pastor. Well, he's managing all the youth and the discipleship and evangelism in that area. And it breaks down all the way across in teams or committees, whatever your church has, that because like you said not long ago in this episode, that you have to have a great understanding of what you're asking people to do. And being a leader, like you said, you're not perfect, but you have to have some kind of strategic vision about where you want to go with this, because just like Nehemiah, he had that. He knew what needed to be done. He spied it out. He saw the broken walls and everything, but he also encouraged the people. He didn't stay in one place. He went around to encourage each section, if you would. And maybe there's a bit of a competition. A Street was trying to beat P Street with that. But I think that's the real strength here in what you're saying. So I think it's important as a lead pastor, if you feel like that's what God's called you to do you have these skills to do this? Because here's what I've seen. I've seen senior pastors try to manage everything, manage all the staff, and what they've done is they're micromanaging them. And no, that's not the way I wanted it done. I want it this way. And instead of giving them an overall vision and letting them put that together, there's a conflict that takes place.
Well, Jethro gave Moses some great advice relative to how to build organizations and the fact that he needed to delegate, that he couldn't do all the work himself. So I think that's a great example of it. I want to make one point clear, that I don't want to denigrate managers. We need managers. But
absolutely.
And managers can grow their leadership skills. As a matter of fact, every one of these 7 skills that we talked about, we can take a look at areas where, by going through questionnaires, you might want to develop certain areas. So every one of these is a growth area potentially for every pastor, every deacon, everybody who's listening. Leaders, on the other hand, if all they have are people skills, then you need to begin developing the problem-solving skills. I mean, a smile will only take you so far, but it is just good to be aware of the fact that each one of these 7 skills we talk about, we have analyzed them, we've synthesized them, and one of the key points is each one of them is developable, and we are supposed to develop as we grow in our walk. That's what sanctification is all about. We're not perfect in any of these areas, but we can grow in every one of them, and that's what we're about with this: getting a better understanding of managerial skills, leadership skills, and growing in those areas.
Well, I think you're exactly right. In fact, progressive sanctification is we become more like Christ every day, but we're never going to have that perfect sanctification to the day we see Jesus face to face when we leave this body behind and our soul goes to be with Christ. And I think we need to look at leadership this way too. I mean, it's a day by day, minute by minute skills. And somebody said, well, I think you're a naturally born leader. Well, that might be somewhat true, maybe 10%, but there's a lot of things to learn as a leader. The way you say it, the way you do it, and showing love and appreciation. In fact, doesn't that make full circle? Know yourself?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's the sincerity, the genuineness, the trust, and continuing to grow, continuing to learn.
And I might add that we need to also know when we've made some mistakes, and if they've been private or if they've been public, and if we've offended someone, that we go and ask them to forgive us, because it can be, it's stressful on any church family, pastor, deacons, leaders, when you get into a major building project, when you get into staff restructuring and those type of things. And hopefully we'll be able to talk about that in a later episode. But George, thank you so much for being with me today.
It's been my pleasure. I've enjoyed it, all of the conversation around leadership and management and the skills. I just enjoy that. Thank you.
All right. Well, I just want to encourage you to share this broadcast with others. Also, you can see a little area that we have on this webpage about supporting the ministry. It takes money to do things. I am not personally wealthy or have some type of inheritance I've received on this, but as you look at the numbers, in fact, you can choose to give $3 a month, $5, I believe, or $10. We're not going to send you a plaque to hang on your wall or anything. Now, if you send a couple $1,000s, we might arrange something on that. But this is kind of pocket change. Do without a Twinkie this week or a candy bar, or get a cheaper coffee. But I'd really like to invite you to go there and just give $3, $5, or $10 a month. It'd be a great investment as we seek to build up and strengthen and support church leadership. God bless you, and have a wonderful rest of the week. The Church Leadership in Focus podcast is sponsored by Church Health Solutions. You may contact the host, Don Hicks, by email at don@churchhealthsolutions.com. Don welcomes ideas on church leadership topics from you that may be used in the future episodes of Church Leadership in Focus podcast. I invite you to share our link with others you know in church leadership and on your social media. Be sure to tune in for our next weekly episode. May the Lord Jesus give you wisdom and guidance as you lead and equip your church.